Hello, everyone, and welcome to Together Facing the Challenge. Session 4, we'll be talking about implementing effective consequences. All right, so coaching helps caregivers to distinguish between an effective consequence given to teach a child appropriate pro-social behaviors versus a punishment. In session 3, we talked about the conflict cycle, button pushing, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, power struggles, how to prevent them, how to escape them, and how to repair and re-energize after a power struggle has occurred. We talked about pre-teaching, iMessages, and teachable moments, and the impact of trauma on youth behavior. Today, we will distinguish between effective and ineffective consequences. We'll learn how to implement and enforce effective consequences for non-compliant behavior. We'll be able to implement an effective behavior contract, understand the importance of consistency in behavior management. So away we go. What is a consequence? A consequence is what really happens, not what you intend to have happen. Scholars use the terms reinforcement, that increases a future behavior. When we talk about that, we're usually talking about rewards and incentives. And then punishment decreases further behavior. We're going to use the term consequences instead of punishment. Other words for reinforcement include incentives and rewards and consequences instead of punishment. Off we go. All right, to implement an effective consequence, once firm and clear limits have been established, following through with consequences for non-compliant behavior is a key component to changing behavior. Remember that effective behavior management is one of the 3 keys to youth success in foster care. Using effective consequences is part of this. Following through with consequences for positive behavior is equally important. Here's an example. Cedric is late for basketball practice and his coach yells at him and says, "Don't be late again." The next week, Cedric is late and the coach responds in the same manner. He continues to be late for practice throughout the season. All right. Instead, Cedric is late for basketball practice and the coach makes him sit out for the next game. Cedric is not late for practice for the rest of the season. So this is a good example of how yelling is not a consequence. It's not a punishment. It doesn't do anything. It is not effective. We've got to follow through with actual consequences for behavior. All right, basic steps for teaching compliance. Give a clear, direct instruction. Allow a brief period of silence for processing. If your child does not begin to follow instructions after that period of time, give a warning. If you do not blank, then blank. Allow a brief period of silence for processing. If your child still does not begin to follow instructions, say, "Since you did not blank, you will now blank." Stay calm through the entire sequence. Logical and natural consequences. What's the difference between a logical consequence and a natural consequence? When possible, avoid unrelated consequences and use a natural consequence instead. When a natural consequence is too severe or unsafe, it is important that parents step in to implement a logical consequence instead. So a good example of that is, hey, you're playing in the street, get out of there. That is not safe. The natural consequence may be getting hit by a car. That's not acceptable. Okay. Logical versus natural consequences. We will be looking at activity 4B. It is page 45 in your worksheets. This is logical versus natural consequences. So we'll just brainstorm some natural versus logical consequences for each of the behaviors listed. And once we've completed the list, review your answers, even come up with some things on your own. If you like the ideas I throw out there for you, fantastic. Then you'll have a bank of consequences that you can use for behaviors that come up. So our first one is not going to bed on time. One logical consequence is no extra screen time or restriction on cell phones, TV, iPads, that kind of thing. A natural consequence is being tired, having a bad day the next day because they're not able to concentrate from lack of sleep, getting up late in the morning, being late. So that's a natural consequence for not going to bed on time. The next box is not doing homework. I'm at home, so my dogs are barking at the neighbors. My apologies. Right, so not doing homework. The logical consequence would be a removal of free time. Too much goofing around, not getting your homework done. So we structure that time a little bit more and there's a little less freedom. A natural consequence is grades go down. The work's not getting done, so you get a bad grade, it brings your average down. You're embarrassed because the homework doesn't get turned in. That's a natural consequence of not doing homework. The next box is cursing. So a logical consequence would be maybe time away from friends or restriction with friend time. A natural consequence is a social consequence. People feel offended when people curse too much. They may have a low opinion of you when you curse. When you're at school, that's especially problematic because teachers don't like that. And if you're making a teacher's life hard, they're probably not going to make your life any easier. So that would be a natural consequence, or those social consequences that come from misbehaving socially. All right, the next behavior box is minor stealing. A logical consequence is restitution. You stole something, well, you have to give it back, and then maybe you have to, pay for it and give it back. Or pay for it, but I don't know. So come up with what you think is right. If it were my child in my home, they would have to pay for it and they would not get the thing that they stole. A natural consequence is the embarrassment of getting caught doing that. Shame, loss of trust. All right, the next box is hitting a sibling. A logical consequence would be a timeout, separation from family, time alone. We'll talk about time out and time in the next few slides and how that works. A natural consequence is a damage to the relationship between siblings. You lose trust, it's just not okay. There's a damage in the relationship between the foster parent and the youth from that kind of behavior. So that would be a natural consequence. All right, the next behavior is staying out past curfew. A logical consequence would be a restricted curfew. If the curfew was, say, 10 o'clock before, then maybe it's 8 o'clock after breaking curfew. The natural consequence is a disruption to the household. There's an amount of worry that comes to the parent when a child breaks their curfew. And then that, of course, destruction of trust and, hey, you knew what the curfew was before. Why did you break that? So disruption to the household, lack of trust, damage to the relationship, those are natural consequences for the staying out past curfew. All right, the next box is a little tricky. Sexually inappropriate behavior. So hopefully you know your foster child really well so that there will be some consequences for this, and there certainly does need to be consequences for it, in addition to possibly some therapy and outside help. This is something that you would want to contact a case manager about, especially with a foster child, and get the village rallied around. So the logical consequence is more supervision and loss of freedoms for sexual misbehavior. You're going to want to watch that kid a lot more closely, and they're not going to be allowed to be alone and do things that they were doing before. So especially if it's watching porn on their phones or their iPads, things like that, then of course those things are going to be restricted. They're going to have G rating. Hopefully as parents you already have some limits set on the types of things that children can view, but kids are smart, they can get around it. So supervision for sure. The natural consequence of sexual misbehavior, and depending on what it is, it's different for boys than for girls. For boys, there's a loss of trust, possibly a low opinion for them because of what they've done. That relationship is broken, trust is gone. Depending on what it is, the natural consequences could be STDs, it can be those consequences from actual intercourse. So depending on what those behaviors look like, the consequences are going to be different, but it's usually not good. So we want to make sure that we're ahead of those sexual misbehaviors. And again, if this is something that you encounter, you want to get with your case manager right away and get everybody rallied around to figure out what to do about it. The next box is hoarding food. This is something that we see in foster kids who have come from insecure situations where they haven't had food regularly. So they may hide food in their rooms. Again, what that's going to look like is more supervision, a little bit of restriction as far as food goes, not too much, because again, these kids have come from insecure situations. They don't know when they're going to get fed. They're not used to being able to just eat when they're hungry. So that is something that needs to be watched. And again, if it's something that continues, something to inform the case manager about. So some natural consequences of food hoarding can be rapid weight gain. There can be health consequences because of that. If they're hiding food and forget about it, that can be a health issue as well, sanitation issue. So those are some of the natural consequences that come with food hoarding. All right, and then the last one is sneaking out. A logical consequence would be restriction. More supervision, maybe video monitoring, without breaking any of the privacy rules that go along with foster care. But again, that one's pretty serious. So we want to make sure that our case managers are informed of that and that we've got everybody involved in what those consequences are going to be. Natural consequence is going to be a lack of trust. It's going to create disruption in the home. That one's pretty serious. So keep an eye out for that one. All right, so that hopefully gives you some good ones for activity 4B, and you've got your grid all filled out there, page 45 for credit. These are the 4 main consequences most commonly used by parents. So it includes time out and time in, privilege removal, work chores, not too crazy on the work chores, and restitution. So going through these timeout or time in, we probably know what timeout is. This is something that works a little bit better for our little kids up to preteen who, they've done something wrong. Okay, you're not going to pick up your toys. You're going to go in timeout. And then when you're done with timeout, you're still going to go pick up your toys. Easy peasy. Time in is supervised timeout, where this is something that would probably work for the hitting behaviors. That child needs to be supervised so that their violence doesn't continue. During time in, a parent would sit with the child and be very quiet. There would be no interaction. It would just be a supervision of that time in. Privilege removal. This is something that works better for our older kids. All right, give me your phone. That hurts. That hurts them. So time with friends, restriction on time, earlier bedtimes, loss of freedom, so those privilege removals. Work chores, again, nothing too crazy. We're not going to make them scrub the bathroom with a toothbrush. We're not going to make them pull weeds in a field full of weeds. That's in our discipline policy that we sign every year. We're not going to make them do crazy things. But dusting the blinds is horrible. And that's a good work chore that always needs to be done. Adding extra that's not already part of their work chores. Those are all good ones, but nothing too long, nothing too terrible. And then 4 is restitution. So if something gets broken, if something gets stolen, they need to work to repay that and restore what was lost. And definitely think about what your definitions are for these. And if you have any questions, talk to a case manager about effective consequences and what you can do and what you can't do. We are not going to role play, so we don't need to worry about that. But for page 46, please pick one of these 4 consequences and brainstorm ways of how you are using this successfully, how you could improve the use of the consequence, and name a common mistake that we make when using this type of consequence. So for example, on page 46, your worksheet, activity 4C, effective consequences, I chose timeout and time in. This is a good one for our little kids. It probably works up until kids are about, I don't know, 10, 11. How are you using this type of consequence effectively? So it's a good idea to have that timeout area all situated anyway. You've got your chair facing outward in the corner. Go sit, think about what you've done, and just make sure that it's communicated so that you know what timeout is, they know what timeout is, and if you don't do this, you will go in timeout. That's how that works, and that's how you use it effectively. Number 2, the question is, how could you improve the use of this consequence? I would say eliminate distractions and make time, because especially if you're going to do time in, that's your consequence too. So you lose a little bit of time when you have to sit with a kid. So you do have to make the patience, make the time to sit and be quiet and carefully supervise, and eliminate the distractions. That's another way to make it a little more effective. So brainstorm some ways that you would use a consequence like that. And then number 3 is name a common mistake that we make when using this type of consequence. So one thing that we do, especially for little kids, is we make it too long. We should be about a minute for every year the child is old. So if you have a 3-year-old, timeout would only be 3 minutes. If you have a 10-year-old, that timeout is only 10 minutes. Okay, because when you're being consequenced, Every minute is like an eternity, we know that. So the really important thing is that you're doing it and following through, not the length of time per se. All right, let's talk a little bit more about timeout and time in. We've all heard that's enough, go to your room. How effective is this as a consequence? So what is the short-term impact and what is the long-term impact? The going to your room, it's not the same as a timeout or a time in. Usually timeout is done in a common area where the child is still being looked at, being supervised. Usually in their room, they can do whatever they want. That's where toys are, that's where screens are. Yeah. So the whole go to your room thing as a consequence is really just getting them away from you. I know I've said that to my kids a few times, just you need to be somewhere that I am not. Go away. But that's not a consequence. That's just me being irritated. So timeout and time in needs to be structured and administered correctly. Timeout really does mean timeout from positive reinforcement. So that means timeout from screen time, from toys, from those things that would be privilege. And then again, some youth may benefit more from time in, and that takes a little bit more care from a parent to sit and do the timeout with the child. All right, so again, to effectively implement timeout and time in, have the timeout area set up before you use it. Monitor the child or accompany him or her to timeout. My pug needs a timeout right now. I'm going to give him a minute. The length of stay in timeout varies based on the age of the child. So the typical rule is 1 minute per year of age. Remove any positive reinforcement from the timeout area. So the timeout area should not be by the toy box. It should not be the computer chair. It shouldn't be in their bedroom where they can't be seen. Those types of things. It should be like I say, like a lonely wall, a lonely corner. Don't engage with the child while he or she is in timeout or time in. Unless there's a safety issue, you know, they're banging their head violently against the wall. You're going to supervise that if a child is trying to hurt themselves or something of a safety issue comes up. At the end of the designated time, the child can only leave timeout if he or she is willing to comply with the original request. So, are you ready to pick up your toys now? Are you ready to do your homework? Are you ready to apologize for hitting? They still have to do what they were going to do, why they're having a consequence. So don't forget that part of it. It's not out when timeout is over. You still have to finish up. And that's a good thing to communicate before the consequence is implemented. Like, okay, you're going to have a timeout and then you're still going to pick up your toys. So what do you want to do? That might help. That might help. All right. Activity 4D is one of our off-road parenting clips. And away we go. What? There we go. All right, so that's a good example of how to implement an effective timeout. He had a mess to clean up. He didn't want to clean it up. No arguing. You either clean it up or you go to timeout. Their timeout is in the bathroom. And it's funny, that's how my stepdad did it too. He's like, go to the bathroom. I'm not talking, go to the bathroom. I still remember that as a kid. Like, why the bathroom? But hey, if it works, then it works. Let's talk a little bit about privilege removal. If you do not complete your homework now, you will have no phone time this evening. All right. So privilege removal, it has to be something that's valued. It has to be something that they care about. So select a valued reward. Don't choose privileges that are important to treatment though. So calls, visits, pro-social activities like their team sports and family fun time, school activities, things like that. That really isn't something that you can take away. So the phone is always a really good one. It hurts them. It hurts them when they don't have that phone. Limit the number of privileges removed. Limit the length of time, and be clear and stick to it. All right, let's talk a little bit about work chores. Unlike removing a privilege, a work chore gives you the additional activity to complete. So you would select tasks that are outside of the child's normal chores. So outside of them picking up after themselves and whatever their household duties are. Make it be meaningful and helpful. Again, dusting those blinds, it always needs to be done. And it's awful. So dusting, we live in a desert. There's always dusting. Mopping, things that actually have to be done, and it matters and makes things better. And it shouldn't be any more than 20 to 30 minutes in duration. So again, that's scrubbing the tile with a toothbrush for hours. That's not good. Anything that's overly long, overly painful, not anything like that would be on our list of things that are in our discipline policy. All right, can be given as an alternative to privilege removal. So it gives you some choices as a parent as to what you want to do, or give the child choices if you want to do that. Do you want to lose your phone, or do you want to do extra chores? Because you're going to have to do one of them. What's it going to be? You can either lose the computer time for the evening or select a work chore from the list. And it's a good idea to have some chores listed out. On our previous worksheet, there was a place to come up with some effective consequences. So you have that in your bank, so you're not struggling to think of, oh, what am I going to do with this kid? No, you've got it written down, ready to go. Restitution. This is effective for behaviors like destroying property. The youth pays for the destruction by fixing it or completing tasks to pay for it. Restitution is not just about financial cost. Inappropriate behaviors can damage relationships too. So restitution can also include actions taken to restore the relationship. And we all know how that can be, how when we lose something, it really means something to get it back. So an example, after a youth broke a neighbor's window, the foster family and their neighbors worked together to create a list of work chores to pay back the $200 window. All right, let's talk about behavior contracts. We make informal contracts all the time. When you're finished cleaning your room, you can go outside. That's a verbal contract. We said it out loud. When you finish your dinner, you can have dessert. Formal contracts, instead of a spoken agreement, are written down. They're used for more problematic behaviors or behaviors that reoccur often. We can track behavior first for more information. And it explains exactly what he or she needs to do to be successful. and intended to eliminate problem behaviors, but it also reinforces pro-social behaviors. So we're going to take a look at an example in just a minute. When implementing a behavior contract, remember to keep it simple. Start with one behavior at a time. Choose a positive behavior that you want to encourage, and this is most likely the opposite of the negative behavior. Choose a behavior that is not too difficult. Best to begin with behaviors that only happen sometimes and you want to increase. Break it down into small steps and help kids connect the behavior to the reward. And of course, we want our kids to be successful. So we don't want to make it impossible or difficult for them to do. Contracts should include the child's name, the behavior or task to be accomplished, when it needs to be done, and the number of times it needs to be done, the reward they're working toward, a place for documenting their progress, a place for the foster parent and the child to sign the contract. And there is one in our worksheet packet. It is activity 4E, the behavior contract. All right, so here are some tips. You want to post it in a prominent place, review the behavior daily, like in a daily check-in, provide rewards immediately for little kids or as soon as possible. And that's really for everybody, as soon as possible. And individualize the contracts, because the things that are important, the rewards that are important are going to be different for everybody. The behaviors are going to be different. All right, putting it into action. We're going to watch a video to see how this family successfully implemented a behavior contract with their foster child. All right. So in that video, you can see they did a good job implementing that behavior contract, really figuring out and drilling down into what this kid needed to do, the steps she needed to take, like getting up at 6:45 to get the bus by 8, which to our kids in Las Vegas must sound like a dream. High school starts at 7 o'clock, and I know my daughter has to be up by 5 if she wants to get to the bus on time. So they started off really complimentary and presented it to her by saying, "You're doing a great job with cleaning your room and doing the laundry." And then drilling down into, we need to get you to the bus on time every day. So let's think of some steps. And she was a little resistant. But in the end, there was an agreement that was come to. So that is a successful behavior contract. All right, so let's consider the following. Allison, you need to finish your homework before going to the movies with your friends. If Allison is allowed to go to the movies when she has not completed her work, she learns mom doesn't really mean what she's saying, or if I beg enough and wear her down, mom will give in. So it's really important to follow through with those consequences. When you say it, that means you have to do it after that. You have to be able to make it happen. If the foster family in the video had just stopped yelling at the kid, nothing would change. Again, yelling is not a consequence. It's not. So try not to yell. Consistency and follow through. Effective consequences given within a supportive environment help youth correct aggressive and antisocial patterns. Don't say it unless you mean it, and follow through with what you say. And especially when you do those behavior contracts, when you do a behavior chart, it's important to follow through with the consequence if it's not done, and to follow through with the reward if it is done. I think it's easier to follow through with rewards. I have a hard time with consequences. I know that about myself as a parent. I don't want that to happen. I want them to do what they're supposed to do. And so you do kind of have to steel yourself and be able to follow through with those consequences. Can you follow through? Ask yourself, what am I teaching by using this consequence? Who is being affected by this consequence? And how willing am I to follow through consistently with this consequence? What if I give a consequence and can't follow through? So admit your mistake, apologize, and provide a more effective alternative. So it is important to correct those behaviors, to have the patience and the follow through to get it done. All right, let's take a look at some things that work and what doesn't work. It works to stay calm, to be clear and direct. Don't back down once you've made your decision. You do have to be ready to have them wear you down and to have them negotiate. So you've got to be a stronger negotiator. State the consequence and the time for which it is in effect. Involve youth in deciding on potential rewards for positive behavior. Follow through with what you say, and when it's over, it's over. What doesn't work? Harsh discipline, humiliation, guilt, and lecturing. These may seem effective in the short term, but they're not. They negatively impact the relationship. It breaks down trust. It breaks down just basically being likable enough for them to mind you. And of course, yelling is unacceptable. Common concern. The consequence seems too easy. The behavior is getting worse instead of better. My youth is too old for timeout, and parenting a teen is a lot more challenging than I realized. As long as you're following through with the consequences, evaluate the effectiveness of the consequence after it's implemented. Don't evaluate it before you've put it through. Sometimes it may seem like a behavior is getting worse before it gets better. It's called an extinction behavior, where a kid will do the thing that they're doing more aggressively right before they give up. So pay attention to that. But if it actually is getting worse, case managers, research, keep trying, keep trying. Young people do get too old for timeout. So that's when we're going to implement privilege removal, work chores, restitution, things like that. It's not time in and time out are not the only consequences available to you. And yeah, it can be challenging parenting a teen. I like it. They can talk, they can reason. I like the teenagers. All right. When it still isn't working, if the consequences you've implemented do not seem to be working, discuss this with your case manager and problem solve. And then consider these following questions. Are the privileges being removed promptly? Are the privileges of value? Are the child's protests being ignored? Are consequences for rule violation being given consistently? Are you following through with the consequences you've given? All right. And then in this packet, there is a behavior contract for you so that you can take a look at what that is. You can practice it at home, write it down. In the video, it talked about gold stars. I've never met a kid who didn't like gold stars. So that one was a little weird to me, but check marks are good. Smiley faces are good. There needs to be a way to track when the good behavior is happening to reward that. So this is a good behavior contract. Good example. All right. And of course, if you have any questions, please email me, call me. I'm usually around. I think everybody, if you don't have my cell phone, give me a call at the office. Today, we learned about consequences, steps for teaching compliance, timeout, privilege removal, restitution, work chores, natural and logical consequences, behavior contracts, and next time in session 5, we're going to talk about foster youth identity. All right, everybody, thank you so much. I will send out an email with the link to the video as well as all of the worksheets that you'll need for credit for Together Facing the Challenge. Thank you so much.